Every year at about this time, an epidemic spreads across the country. Are you taking care of yourself?
I tell them what I do, and they're like, "Oh, cool!" But I just look at the with the radar. I just look at weather.com, and I tell them that all of these other sites are like a general practitioner, like your family doctor, whereas I am like the specialist. I'm that type of person, and that's what we do. So,
if you've been diagnosed with the fever, ski fever, that is, we brought in a specialist who may just have the cure.
That's kind of what I tell people is from a skiing standpoint, I know exactly what you need to do, and you're kind of going to a specialist when you come to us, because all we do is forecast snow in big mountains. I really don't look at the forecast.
Winter is coming. Welcome to MTNmeister.
Who are the MTNmeisters?
Committing to the goal and galvanizing you and your team behind that one single focus.
Being at peace with that fear and being okay with it.
You gain a real appreciation for your life and for what you have.
Learn about their extreme lives on rock, snow, and ice with your host, Ben Shank.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Meister fans. Hello to those of you who are new to this podcast. Welcome to MTNmeister. Today with me, I have Joel Gratz. Joel, welcome.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So for the listeners who don't know Joel, Joel is the co-founder of OpenSnow.com, a website hosting weather forecasts and information with an added flair. They include personable forecasts, live snow reports directly from the hill, custom snow alerts, and many other services to help you find the powder. They started specializing in Colorado, and now they're all over the country. Joel, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, any chance to talk about snow is fun for me. I appreciate it.
I was told one time in a professional development class that I shouldn't start a conversation talking about weather, but I'm guessing in this case it was a good decision, right?
Well, yeah, it is, and it's a dangerous thing with me, and my girlfriend and my friends know this quite well. That when somebody just innocently asks me about some very simple weather concept that they probably think will be a 5-second answer, it usually turns into 5 minutes, 15 minutes. I'm drawing something on a whiteboard or in the dirt or something like that. So, yes, it's always been my go-to, and in this case, you should ask me about it for sure.
And how cool is that, though, that like you get so fired up about weather, and then other people get so excited about other things. I don't know, like bull riding or insurance or podcasts, and that's your career, and that's my career. I'm a podcaster, and it's awesome. I just think it's so cool that we as humans are so different.
Yeah, and it's fun that we can do what we want to do, and I am eternally grateful, lucky, whatever it is, that what I have loved to do since I was 4 or 5 years old is what I get to do now and make a living at, and hopefully get to do for the rest of my life. And it's funny you bring up insurance, because I was in insurance.
Oh, really?
Actually, yeah. So when I graduated, I went to school, undergrad at Penn State for meteorology, came out to Boulder for grad school and did meteorology and an MBA. And I had always kind of thought, hey, I want to do weather and business, because I like both. And I loved forecasting, but I didn't just want to be a forecaster. And business was intriguing, but I didn't just want to be running numbers and have no kind of connection to my passion of weather. So I wanted to combine them. And when I graduated from grad school, I got a job at a local company here in Boulder called ICAT Managers that did hurricane and earthquake insurance. Now, people think that that's pretty ridiculous that a company in Boulder would do hurricane and earthquake insurance. Of course, we did not insure any hurricanes here. We did insure a few earthquake risks here in Colorado, but for the most part, we did hurricanes in the Gulf and Atlantic coasts of the U.S. and earthquakes in the western U.S. But that was, it turned out, not a passion of mine, insurance. It was fun. It was interesting. The people I worked with were great. I had a lot of opportunities there. But it just, I loved being out in the weather and forecasting kind of more our daily lives, especially around snow, than kind of just running historical weather statistics, which essentially is what insurance people do.
Right, yeah. And I actually interned for an insurance company when I was in college, and I had no idea how much of an effect the weather can have on profitability and that sort of thing. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it was eye-opening to me, and the amount of money changing hands around the world in insurance and reinsurance, which is a fun thing that I had to learn about. And for anybody that doesn't know that's listening, reinsurance is insurance for insurance companies. So yes, it continues on up the chain because if an insurance company has a big loss, they have their own insurance that will kick in. So it's a lot of data, it's a lot of mathematical models, and the weather plays a really big part in this, especially from obviously a hurricane insurance perspective. So that was fun, but ultimately not my career.
Yeah, absolutely. So the listeners have probably had about their monthly dose of insurance information.
Yeah, that's all you need to know.
That's it. Yeah. When they heard you being introduced as a weather forecaster, and this podcast is being released in October, Joel, what do we got this winter? Tell us exactly how much snow we're going to get and what weekends we're going to get it.
Yeah, absolutely. So January 2nd, I think, is a really good powder day. Also, February 5th. Anybody that's listening that actually thinks that's a real forecast, you shouldn't think that's a real forecast. Nobody can do anything like that. This question of these seasonal forecasts is interesting because I, despite writing essentially the same thing at the beginning of the season for the last 5 years, that seasonal forecasts are mildly worthless, people still ask me often, and good friends ask me. I was in Aspen this past weekend, and a friend of mine who I hadn't seen for a while, we caught up, shook hands, walking down the street, and he said, "All right, just before we talk anymore, I just want to," and I knew what he was going to do. He was asking me what the season was going to be like, and I do not know. So the reason that I'm so hesitant on these seasonal forecasts is a couple things. One, over the last 5 or 10 years that I've been doing this, I've rarely seen an outfit, a weather forecasting company, consistently accurately predict long-range weather forecasts. So sometimes companies will be able to look at all the variables and make a somewhat accurate prediction for the upcoming season. But I haven't seen this done consistently. And so when you're right 1 year or 2 years, but then not right the next year, it's kind of hard to take these things seriously.
They're lucky. They're not skillful.
Well, and they might be skillful, but you don't know when the skill, when they have more skill than less skill. That's the challenge. And so while there might be good science behind everything, the patterns aren't necessarily locked in stone, that you don't know exactly what's happening and why every year. And so some years you're just not going to know, or the predictability is going to be lower. But it's hard to know that at the beginning of the year. So that's one problem. The other problem for skiers, and this is much more relevant, is that even if you predict accurately, and this is a big if, but if you do predict accurately a seasonal snow total, or the amount above or below average the temperatures are, that doesn't necessarily help you find really good snow conditions, because on the average over a winter, that's not how we ski. We ski on a daily basis, and that means we need to time snowstorms, hopefully avoid rainstorms or periods of warm weather or high pressure where there's not a whole lot of snow. And so even if you can predict that the season will be 20% above normal snowfall, you can't tell somebody that, hey, the last week in December or early February is going to be good. Most of the time, if you think seasonal predictions are hard, predicting, kind of specific weeks or times of a year is basically impossible. So
if we can't do it at the beginning of the season,
yep.
How long or how far ahead of time do we need to wait until you can accurately forecast a snowstorm?
Yeah, so I usually give people this rule of thumb, which is what I live by as well. There's no secrets up my sleeve. Like what I say is how I chase powder as well. So I would say that at the 7 to 10 day out range, you can get a pretty good feel for active versus not active. And so you don't want to be looking at any details, really, of the forecast, like timing on a certain day or a certain temperature or amount of snow. But usually 7 to 10 days out, you have a pretty good idea if there's going to be an upcoming interesting weather pattern, but with snow and storms possible, or if it looks pretty dry with high pressure. So 7 to 10 days, you're kind of getting an inkling of what's going to happen. At around 5-ish days, 4 to 5-ish days, I like to be able to start locking in timing ish. You can kind of pinpoint certain days and have a decent clue if, hey, are we talking about a couple little small storms, potentially a big storm, something like that. So the details are still iffy at 4 to 5 days, but you can start to hone in on it a little bit. And what I tell people at 4 to 5 days is that's the time when you want to start clearing your calendar of meetings. So that's, or just block something out so somebody doesn't schedule it. You just want to kind of give yourself the benefit of the doubt that, hey, if it does turn out that 5-day forecast looks good, you're able to take advantage. But it's really not until, I'd say right around 2 days, sometimes 3, but right around 2 to 3 days, that I start having a decent bit of confidence around, is this going to be a powder day? How much snow? Where's the best snow going to fall? And so that's when I usually tell people, even if you've cleared your calendar about 5 days out, 2 to 3 days out is when you want to start really layering it on, like you're really coming down with a flu.
Starting to feel under the weather.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's when you know, like, hey, if I start now, then everybody in a day or two really is going to believe I'm feeling terrible. And then when I'm out in 3 days, then I have a really good excuse.
Right. Until everybody finds this out, and it's 2 days ahead of time. Oh, you're starting to get sick because of Joel Gratz's forecasting technique, right? Yeah, it's. I've heard from a lot of people here in Colorado, and I'm sure it's similar with our other forecasters elsewhere around the country, that usually when our forecast comes out in a morning, maybe 2 or 3 days out, and we're calling a certain powder day, it's kind of a rush for people who work at the same company to try to like outsmart each other and take the day off. Like if they all can't leave, if somebody has to stay, like they're trying to like take the day off before somebody else so they can ensure that they're out of the office. Excellent. How did you have the idea to start OpenSnow? First of all, I gave our listeners a little bit of an overview of OpenSnow, but tell us a little bit more about exactly what you do, and then also when you founded it. Yeah, well, the idea probably started in 1985 when I went skiing for the first time. So for any East Coast listeners, I grew up skiing outside of Philadelphia up at Shawnee Mountain in the Poconos. So that was my first taste of skiing. But for most meteorologists, we get hooked from a certain weather event early in our lives. Sometimes it's a hurricane, sometimes it's a flood, other times it's a snowstorm, a tornado. But this is not altogether uncommon for most meteorologists to know from a very early age that this is what they want to do. Very few of us go to college undecided for a major. That's very interesting. Yeah, we know it, and we know it early too. And it's usually not even high school. It's middle school. It's elementary school. We're just fixated on weather. So I grew up outside of Philadelphia, and I was fixated on the weather. I watched. This is kind of pre-internet. I'm not that old, but kind of late 80s, early 90s. And I was watching the Weather Channel. I'd watch all 3 local newscasts because they did the weather at slightly different times after the hour, so I could catch all of them. I was that guy, right? Like I got a weather station on my roof that my dad put up. So I knew from an early age this is what I wanted to do. And I love snow because I love skiing. And I would get uncontrollably excited about snow. I would wake up before my parents to shovel, to make a fire in a wood-burning stove, to ensure that school was closed, and then I would shovel again. I mean, it was ridiculous, right? So fast forward, and I did the insurance company gig, but I was here in Colorado, and I loved skiing powder. I didn't get the chance to do that back east and had no idea what that was like, but coming out here, it was just the first couple experiences were eye-opening, and I was hooked on powder. And that's coming from an ex-racer and ski instructor. So I would travel around the state with friends, and we'd go ski the best snow we could find.
But there was a problem. And the problem was that many of the forecasts that I was looking at were very, very bad. Or maybe that's not exactly right, but they weren't very good consistently. And so here's the impetus. There's really two for OpenSnow, the impetus for OpenSnow. The first thing was that I was at Vail, and I think it was my second year that I was here in Colorado. We skied just an incredibly good powder day, just perfect powder. And I was talking to a friend of mine's uncle who had lived in the Vail Valley for 30 years, and he went there to ski bum actually, and then started a very successful business and figured out a way to both ski bum and have a good business. So good role model. But he and I were talking after the day of skiing, and he said, "Hey, do you think tomorrow is going to be another powder day?" And I said, No. I've looked at my models online, and no, it's going to clear out. We're done. And he looked at me, and he kind of just looked up at the clouds, and the top of the mountain was still obscured in snow and clouds. He said, No, it's going to blow around. Going to be another 6 inches of snow, but with the wind, it'll feel like another foot in spots, and tomorrow will be a good day. And I said, well, ha, you local guy with no weather experience or knowledge, right? I don't think you're correct. I'm going to drive home. And home was back in Boulder, about 2 hours away. And of course, I leave Vail, come up over Vail Pass, and it's just dumping snow. And of course, the next day was a great powder day that I did not ski. So that really made me mad. And then there was one more thing that pushed me over the edge, which was, I believe it was in 2005. I was skiing in Breckenridge, and it was right around Thanksgiving, and Breckenridge had reported about 6 inches of snow. A pretty good day, especially for early or late November, early in the season. And we had a fun day. It was fun to be out there, good conditions. And I was driving home, and I got a call from a friend of mine, also an East Coaster who was working at Steamboat. And she said that I should have come to Steamboat because she skied, quote, booby deep snow, end quote. And she's normal size, right? Like she's, 5'5", 5'6", whatever. And so booby deep snow is quite a bit of snow. It's not, of course, when you're skiing, you're kind of crouching down a little bit. So it wasn't, 5 feet of snow, but it was close. Over 2 days, over 48 hours, Steamboat had gotten 48 inches of snow. Yeah, it was huge. It was, and that's not necessarily typical, but it happened. And so I was livid, right? Because Steamboat is only about an hour and a half from Breckenridge. If I had been able to forecast that, no offense to Breck, but I would have gone where there was more snow, which is Steamboat. So that just pushed me over the edge. I was mad that there was no skier-specific local source of weather information in Colorado, and I was in a unique position to do something about it because I had a degree in meteorology and love snow. So
we always hear about entrepreneurial successes coming after huge failures, and people say, I fell flat on my face. In your case, it's that you missed the powder, Joel.
You got it. And as anybody knows, especially, it's not just when you miss the powder, but when you know somebody else who didn't miss the powder.
Worse.
Oh, it's terrible. It's terrible. So that was what drove me to do something about it.
Very neat. I want to figure out a little bit more about the analysis that you use at OpenSnow, because there are obviously other weather forecasting sites out there. Like you mentioned, we got weather.com, right? WeatherBug, all of those. First of all, I think you're probably allowed to say this, but are there any sites out there that you would just tell the listeners quit looking at those right now?
No, and I would say if you're just looking for a 2 or 3 day forecast for a high temperature for your local city, like what you're going to wear tomorrow, for the most part, they're all going to be really close. And they're all going to be fine. And some of these weather sites claim, we're more accurate here or this. And when you look at the statistics, a lot of times you're talking about a few percentage points more in accuracy. And I don't know about you, but I can't tell the difference between 72 and 71 degrees. Like I just don't know. Or even, 23 or 24 degrees. So if you're just looking to kind of what's the weather going to be tomorrow on a relatively tranquil day, and I need to see what the temperatures are going to be, it's all fine. The challenges come when you get into mountainous terrain. And there are all sorts of challenges with weather. and we'll talk about some of them probably over the next couple of minutes, but mountains throw a real wrench in the forecasting models. And so this is kind of the unique advantage is to forecast mountain weather, you need to know all of the subtleties of the mountains, where the mountains are, where the valleys are, which wind directions favor certain mountains. And these are things that are just not quite baked in to the computer weather models just yet. These models have improved in accuracy a tremendous amount over the last couple of decades, even since I went to school at Penn State between 99 and 2003, even between then and now, and it's 2014 now, the models have improved tremendously. But where they still struggle is in the mountains because they just don't quite have the high enough resolution for the most part to depict each mountain peak and each mountain valley. So they kind of smooth out the mountains as a whole as like this big block of Earth. But you lose the subtle features, and the subtle features are, especially in the bigger mountains, are what drive the snowfall. So I like to give people the analogy when people ask me all the time on the chairlift, and I tell them what I do, and they're like, "Oh, cool!" But I just look at the radar. Or I just look at weather.com, and I tell them that all of these other sites are like a general practitioner, like your family doctor, whereas I am like the specialist. And God forbid you should ever need a knee specialist, but I'm that type of person, and that's what we do. So much like you wouldn't go to your family doctor if you needed to have your knee repaired, that's kind of what I tell people is from a skiing standpoint, I know exactly what you need to do, and you're kind of going to a specialist when you come to us, because all we do is forecast snow in big mountains. I really don't look at the forecast for Denver or for Grand Junction or for Chicago or for New York City or any of these other locations. We just focus on mountain snowfall.
Very specialized and very cool. Hearing you say this, my high school biology teacher always used to say this thing. He said, being a forecaster is the only job where you can be wrong the majority of the time and still keep your job. And that kind of bothers me. And I think it bothers me now more because I don't think it's true anymore. You talked about the advancements over the last 10 years. How accurate are you and these other sites, I guess?
Well, it doesn't just bug you, that phrase. It bugs me. Now that said, I laugh it off. For any listeners out there, when you say that to a meteorologist, you think you're probably being kind of funny
and coy. Huh?
Not just hers, like, trust me, it is the 1,000th time I've heard that, right? Like, it's not, I don't mind if you make fun. Like, hey, we're not perfect all the time. Absolutely poke us for that. But, come up with something better. That's all I ask.
More creative, yeah.
Exactly. Just be unique. So here's a really interesting book for anybody who's interested in not necessarily the technical aspect of weather, but just a really good story of the science of weather and where it's come from over the last 50 years. Check out a book called Warnings, like a weather warning, Warnings, by a guy named Mike Smith. He tells the story of weather science since the 50s and 60s. And to put this in perspective, in the late 60s and early 70s, warning or predicting a tornado was thought to be impossible. Just flat out impossible. Like you would get laughed at when people would suggest that we should start doing something like this. And now 40 years later, almost every tornado is warned. Now, it's not perfect. Of course, there are warnings when there are no tornadoes and things like that. Some have more lead time than others. But just imagine that you've gone within 4 decades, one generation, from a time when people lived in fear at night that a tornado would strike without warning. Nobody would know until the next morning that the town was destroyed, until now, when we can actually forecast almost every tornado or every storm that's capable of producing a tornado. So that kind of puts in perspective how far weather science has come, and what was difficult to make a 1 or 2 day forecast before, we can now make 5 and 6 day forecasts relatively reliably. And even though the details might not be exactly right of a big nor'easter in 5 days or a big powder day along the West Coast, you still have an inkling. You understand that something is happening, something is coming, and to kind of watch out for that. And that's just remarkable. That's just a crazy good improvement over 4 decades. which is very short amount of time when you're improving the science that much.
That is fantastic. I'm wondering going forward, I mean, so we've seen so much improvement in 40 years, but we still do encounter a lot of problems in the fact that when we see these devastating hurricanes or tornadoes or earthquakes with tsunamis, there isn't quite enough time sometimes to get people evacuated. Do you think this will evolve in the next 40 years?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, and just to clarify, so the earthquake and the tsunami, I mean, that's a kind of non-weather geophysical event. So I can't talk about that very much. There is some earthquake prediction that people are trying, but it's definitely a very new science. But when it comes to weather, I guess you can think of the challenges around these big events being twofold. Perhaps 50% is science, and perhaps 50% is not science, and is communication. So let me give you kind of that example. Hurricane Katrina, which in 2005 went into the Mississippi coast and had a big impact on New Orleans, was almost perfectly forecast 2 to 3 days in advance. It was. I mean, I remember this because I was actually working for the insurance company at the time, and the 2 to 3 day National Hurricane Center forecast was almost perfect, and like plenty good enough to evacuate the people that need to be evacuated. But the challenge is in communicating the certainty you have or meteorologists have in the forecast and communicating that in a way that local officials will understand and can understand how to take action on. And I don't blame local officials for being skeptical oftentimes of dire weather forecasts, because especially now or even over the last 5 years, everybody with a Facebook account is talking about, the next 2-inch snowstorm like Armageddon. And, stay tuned here, folks, for the latest, whether it's going to be 2 or 3 inches, right? So everybody is kind of on this edge of every storm seems to be the last storm of Earth's time. So I understand how people try to filter that information and oftentimes don't heed when there are true extreme events. But that communication aspect from a meteorologist to a local official talking about the uncertainty or the certainty of the forecast and encouraging them to take action based on that, that is at least half, if not more, of the warning challenge. So that's that part. And it's unfortunate what happened in New Orleans. Not that you could have evacuated everybody or known that all of the levees or that so many levees would break, but you at least knew that, hey, this is a serious storm. These things are highly likely with a serious storm. And it was really Mayor Nagin's lack of action kind of during the 2 to 3 day window that hurt a lot of the preparedness from the city, and he didn't really take action until a little bit too late. So that's the communication aspect. The science aspect, however, is also very difficult. And you're dealing with extreme events, which means that the computer models that we use are good about 90% of the time, because 90% of the time, or even more, 95% of the time, 99% of the time, the weather behaves as it always had. We can look back in the last 20 or 30 years of history, and there's a storm that's kind of come through like the future possible storm that we're looking at. But every now and again, the variables in the atmosphere come together, and they interact in such a way that produces a storm that just is kind of at that 1%. Like we rarely ever see it. And the computer models just do not, at this point, do well with predicting that. They just don't think that all of those variables can come together and produce such a monstrous storm. So there's a scientific challenge there for sure. There was a big flooding here in Colorado last September 2013, where Boulder got a year's worth of precipitation in about 36 hours, almost 20 inches of precipitation. And so earlier that week, the computer models forecasted a couple inches of precipitation, which to all of us forecasters are like, wow, that's a lot for September. I mean, that alone would have been almost record-breaking. But we couldn't know from those models that the atmosphere would have achieved such an outlier mode, as one of my friends and professors says, to bring us that much. So it's half communication, and the warning challenge, and still half science for sure.
Wow, very cool. We'll get to your gear recommendation now, Joel. We ask all of our guests for a gear recommendation, and like you said, you're a passionate skier and outdoors enthusiast yourself. Give our listeners a gear recommendation.
Absolutely. So I'm going to take maybe a duck out of this one, take an easy one. Ooh. But weight. It is so important. Last year was the first year I ever skied on Dynafit bindings, which are a tech binding. They don't look like a normal binding, and they're generally used for backcountry users that want to skin up hills. But the really interesting thing is they weigh very, very little because they're made for really going uphill, but have great downhill performance. And that combined with new skis I got last year, which also weighed a tiny, tiny amount compared to previous skis. And they were made by Wagner Custom Skis, who was just a buddy of mine. But the combination of these things, it removed so much weight from my setup that I was able to ski longer without stopping. And not just for the day, but each individual run as well. I could ski an entire powder run without my legs getting super tired, just due to the weight. I can move my skis more quickly around trees or around rocks or something like that more quickly because they just didn't weigh as much. So that's my recommendation. Of it's not just about the performance of a carving ski or a binding, but God, when things weigh less, you can just do more and get less tired, which is really cool. That's
fantastic. And then also not drinking as many beers will probably take some weight off too.
Yeah, so. That's just harder to manage, right?
Exactly.
Like it's that's tough.
Yeah, you got to figure out what's more important. So anyway, we will throw the weight on your Meister profile page. Yes. Thank you so much, Joel. To wrap it up, I just want you to blow our listeners' minds. I always like when experts like you throw out some sort of crazy statistic that we've never known or that we never thought we would know, but now we know. Sure. So give us just a random stat or fact that's going to blow our mind.
Yep, I'm going to give you one that still confounds me to this day.
Okay.
This is going to drive me until I figure this thing out. Remember, this is a good way to start and end the podcast very similarly. Mm-hmm. Remember I was talking about that 48 inches in 48 hours at Steamboat? Mm-hmm. So I call this the Steamboat Surprise. And Steamboat, more than any other place in Colorado, can have a weather setup, where they get 5-8 times more snow than any model was predicting or anybody else within 100 miles gets, any other mountain. Huh. And it still confounds me. The only thing that I've figured out, the only commonality between these storms, and they usually happen maybe once a year, once every other year, is that you have a temperature at the top of the mountain right around 10 or 15 degrees Fahrenheit, and you have a wind that's out of the west. And that is common to all of these situations. There was another time 2 years ago where they got 23 inches overnight. Definitely not forecastable. Absolutely not. So all of these situations, the temperature at the mountaintop was about 10 to 15 degrees, which is great for creating snowflakes. And the wind was from the west, which hits Steamboat square on and is forced to rise over the mountain, which helps to produce snow. But here's the kicker. Here's the mystery, is that this combination of temperature and wind and moisture happens many times during a season. Why is it just once or twice that you get the Steamboat Surprise? I do not know.
Whoa,
there's the riddle.
Steamboat Surprise. That is fantastic and great marketing for Steamboat as well.
Right? I mean, they go with champagne powder, but I just like to go with Steamboat.
Yeah, very alliterative, very good. Thank you so much, Joel, for joining us today on Mountain Meister. It has been awesome having you.
Oh, it's great. I can't believe that you're actually still listening to me talk about weather. I'm glad you're cutting this off because we could keep going.
I've enjoyed every second of it. For the listeners, if you have enjoyed it as much as I have, go out and go to the App Store on your iPhone, type in OpenSnow, and you can find the app there. Joel, I assume you're on Android as well?
We are on Android. We are on the internet. We'll do smoke signals however we can communicate.
Yes, exactly. OpenSnow.com. Check it out. Thanks so much, Joel. It's been great having you.
Absolutely. Good to be here.
Hi, everyone. Hope you enjoyed that episode with Joel Gratz of OpenSnow.com. Check out the Meister profile page for all the details. Also, I hope that got you fired up to go skiing or snowboarding or whatever else you do on the snow. Just think, OpenSnow to find your location, Mountain Meister on the chairlift. Can you imagine a better chairlift buddy than me? Probably not, which is why I choose me every time.